I'd like to begin tonight's proceedings by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands and the waters on which we gather, which for me is Gadigal land, but for most of you, probably Camilla Regal people. I wish to acknowledge the continuing connection to their lands, waters, and communities, and pay my regards to elders past and present and emerging, and also extend the respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here tonight. And we must always remember this was, and always will be Aboriginal land, and sovereignty was never ceded. Now, I'd like to greet all those of you who are members of the organisations that are organising tonight's Candidates Forum. Please note this session is being recorded and we posted on the NCC website after the event. If you wish to catch up on Ecotransit, Total Environment Centre and Australian Parents for Climate Action activities or support our work or becoming a member, you can find information on our websites, the address of which will be posted in the chat. Now, just briefly about Ecotransit. We're a non-partisan, non-political community activist group for advocating for public and active transport, primarily in Sydney, but we've spread our interest into the regions of New South Wales as well. And then I'll pass it over to Nick, who's going to give us a quick overview on Australian Parents for Climate Action.
Thanks very much, Colin. And hi, everybody. Great to see you tonight. Just briefly, if you haven't heard of Australian Parents for Climate Action before, we're Australia's leading climate advocacy organisation for parents, carers, families, and everyone who cares about the safe climate future for their kids. We educate and empower our supporters to make the climate safer for every child. And we've been around for about 4 years, founded by mums across the country. And I've been with the organisation for a couple of years, and I'm really excited about where we're headed. We've got 17,000 members so far. Everyone's welcomed. You don't need to be someone with kids. Mine are just going to bed in the background, so it could get a bit noisy. I'll leave it at that, but I'll post our link into the chat, and really grateful to meet you all here tonight.
And now I'll ask for Mel Gray to give a brief talk on the NCC, please. Mel.
Yeah, thank you, Colin and Nick. My name's Mel Gray. I run the Murray-Darling Basin Water Campaign for the New South Wales Nature Conservation Council. I'm based on Tubbagah-Mang, Wiradjuri country out here in Dubbo. Now, for the last 65 years or so, the Nature Conservation Council has been the voice for nature in New South Wales. We advocate for and campaign to protect nature and for a safe climate. NCC currently has over 180 member groups with whom we collaborate with and support to take impactful action and further strengthen the movement. Ecotransit is one of those groups. The NCC has a strong history of non-partisan political campaigning. We are here for the issues. We are not here for the politicians, the parties, or the ideologies. This allows us to constructively work with all parties and candidates to create focus on nature and a safe climate. Our aim in the lead up to this election is to support communities, groups and leaders in all electorates across New South Wales to run strategic and powerful campaigns so as to build a stronger, more cohesive environmental movement in New South Wales. Thanks.
I'd like to introduce the first candidate, and that's James Mullins from the Greens.
Ooh, just give me a second. Hey, good day, everyone. I'm James Mullins. I'm running for the Greens in this upcoming state election. I'd also like to start by acknowledging the Camaragal people whose land we're meeting on today, at least virtually meeting on today, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and also acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded as we work towards reconciliation with our Aboriginal brothers and sisters. So look, I'm a 27-year-old who works 2 jobs in the local area. I work for the local newspaper, the North Sydney Sun and North's Basketball. I also live in Wollstonecraft, and my dad just lives up the road in Greenwich. Mum lives down in Kirribilli. I'm a real North Sider. Moved here about 11 years ago to Waverton originally. Also lived in North Sydney, spent time in Kirribilli as well, Chatswood. So I've lived all over this district and I seriously love this place. I know the North Shore doesn't have the biggest reputation for being a place where people in their 20s live, but I absolutely love it here. The natural beauty, the community, And also the local sports teams. I love my Bears, basketball and rugby league as well. Those are great community organisations that I love to support. Throughout my work, I spend a lot of time talking to people in the area. So with my basketball job, talk to a lot of parents, kids, families, adults as well. And with the newspaper, I spend a lot of my time interviewing local businesses, people of interest, and significant locals. So this experience has given me a lot of time to listen to the concerns, listen to the ambitions, listen to how optimistic people are in this area for the future, but also for the concerns, because there are some serious concerns out there. We've spent the last decade kind of meandering with a government that I think has lost its way. And I think communities like this are missing out as a result of that. The big issues I want to run on this election, starting off with the biggest one, not just because this is an Ecotransit forum, is public transport and transport more broadly. If you look around our community, it's really choked up by cars, roads, and huge chasms of concrete. The Greens are proposing to increase ferry services in this area to connect up the North Shore. I think it's quite ridiculous that you can't catch a ferry from Neutral Bay to Mossman without having to go through the city. And there's still no ferry access to Balmoral Beach, and we all know how much of a parking nightmare that is. We also need to be investing more in active infrastructure, especially cycling. I do not drive. I rely on my bike and public transport a lot to get around. And active transport and public transport are the best ways to clear up traffic congestion and free up our communities. Also going to be campaigning hard on protecting biodiversity. Around our area, we see trees being destroyed, habitats being destroyed by mega projects, and that's simply unacceptable, as our state has one of the largest land clearing rates already. And lastly, we want to crack down on corruption, because while the New South Wales government is funneling funds through pork barrels to other communities, our community is missing out. So our community infrastructure, like North Sydney Oval, for example, is crumbling because our community is being neglected. So we need to crack down on corruption. But ultimately, I'm quite optimistic. I'm quite young, and I'm here because I really, really care about all this, and want to see a better future for our community and for my kids in the future. I don't
That's
know.
enough. You're up to time now.
Thank you.
Now, introduce the next speaker, Helen Conway, please.
Well, thanks very much, Colin, and thanks to everybody for being on the call tonight. And I similarly acknowledge the Camaragal people whose lands we're meeting, well, I'm certainly on tonight. I've lived in the North Shore electorate for 28 years. I've got a very broad and diverse background. I've had over 18 years experience as a senior executive in organisations such as the NRMA and Caltex, over 20 years experience in organisations as a director, organisations like Westpac Insurance, Endeavour Energy, Sydney Ferries and Catholic Healthcare, and prior to that, 10 years in private practice as a lawyer. I'm proud to say I'm a champion for women's rights. Most notably, I set up the federal government's Workplace Gender Equality Agency, and prior to that, I was a senior judicial member of New South Wales Equal Opportunity Tribunal. I have a long history of community work, including being a volunteer solicitor at various community legal centres, including the Women's Legal Resources Centre. I've been a director of Youth Mental Health Service Reach Out, and I've chaired Women for Election Australia and the YWCA. I've got a reputation for high standards of personal and professional integrity, and I've got a track record of getting things done. Now, the most common question I'm asked when I'm out and about is, why are you doing this? And I say the answer is really, really simple. The two-party system is not representing the concerns and aspirations of our community. And frankly, I could no longer sit on the sidelines and watch the erosion of integrity in New South Wales politics. I feel very strongly about restoring trust in government. And I've been inspired by the examples of crossbench achievements both here in this state and also federally. A strong crossbench in New South Wales will make a big difference in improving the quality of government legislation, in driving policy reform, and importantly, in holding the government of the day to account. And I look forward to being part of that crossbench in the interest of our community. I stand for restoring integrity in New South Wales politics, stronger and faster climate action, including no new fossil fuels projects and stopping logging of native forests. A stronger, greener economy that will address our cost of living and housing crises. And an overview of our planning system that will better serve our communities. And finally, better public and active transport infrastructure. You'll see full details of all my policies on my website. The current government is tired and out of touch. It's run out of ideas, and we need more independence to inject energy into New South Wales politics and ensure that communities are treated with true respect. This government continues to debase process. It openly engages in rorting and is constantly plagued by scandal. If not called to account, this behaviour will become normalised to the very serious detriment of our democracy. Politics needs to be done differently.
10 seconds, Helen.
A strong voice it can really trust. As a community independent, I won't be constrained by a party platform, party factions, or powerful vested interests. I'll simply be a captive of the community of North Shore.
Thank you, Helen. Now I'll pass it over to Felicity Wilson for her presentation.
Thank you very much, Colin. And I also want to recognise the Cammeraygal people whose land I am on today and every day as I live and work and raise my kids on this wonderful country, and thank Elders past, present and emerging for their custodianship of the land, the seas and the sky. And we're so fortunate to live in an area like this. When you think about the amount of stunning bushland, harbour foreshore, the natural environment that's been preserved, we're very fortunate, and I think that goes back for the many tens of thousands of years of history reflected today. Let me also give a shout out and thank you to those who've organised it. Obviously, Colin, thank you for the work you're doing in moderating tonight. Thank you very much to Mel and Christina from the NCC. And thank you more broadly to the NCC. As an elected member of Parliament, they've been invaluable as a resource to me when there's been issues I've wanted to get advice on. I've gone to them when I was working to prevent the private native forestry legislation to go through the House last year. They were on side with me, providing me with the kinds of detailed advice and analysis so that I could stop that bill going through the Parliament and ensure that we weren't extending private native forestry. So thank you to the NCC for all the work you do. Thank you to Parents for Climate Action, Nick. I'm a parent for climate action myself with my little ones, as I think any parent with young children is. I mean, we're all thinking about the future generations, the world that our small children are going to live in and inherit, and our obligations, not just to leave the world as good as we've had it, but in better conditions. So thank you for the work that you do, and particularly all the work you've done on solar schools. In my community, we've got at least 3 of our schools are already on that journey or have solar on the schools, and such an important initiative that's been championed by parents and by students. So thanks for the work on that. And I think also we had Total Environment Centre, but I haven't seen anybody here from TEC. So thanks to them for participating as well. Most people would probably know me. I'm your local member of Parliament. I was elected almost 6 years ago, and I ran for Parliament because I wanted to make a difference in my community. And since becoming a member of Parliament, I've had 2 children while in office. So I've got a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. And I've also become a single mum in that time. So for me, I have a really keen focus on what's best, not just for them, but for everybody else in our community, because I understand exactly the issues that they face. You know, we have a real concern in this area about getting the best opportunities for our children, best opportunities for ourselves, and making sure that we can do so in a way in which means we can continue to live in this beautiful area of the world. We have, about half the electorate rents. I'm a renter. About half the electorate's in strata, so a lot of apartment living, very dense. And so we do, as a government, and what we've done is introduce a range of different reforms, not only to try and put pressure on renting, but to increase open space and amenity in our community. And we're also leading the country in our action on climate change. So I want to thank you all for having us here today. I really appreciate it. And thank you to all of our fellow candidates for joining too.
Thank you very much, Felicity. Do we have Victoria online or not?
We do.
Good, Victoria, you're there.
Katrina sent me a link, but I can see you, but I think my screen is blank, which is, I don't know what to do. The start video has a cross on it and I can't get it to release. However,
well, if you're happy
what would you like me to say?
Let's make your presentation now, if you'd like. You'd like to start?
Who am I speaking to?
Well, I'm the moderator. I'm Colin, but
Colin,
you can be heard, I think, loud and clear by everyone.
Goodo. And would you like me just to answer the questions one by one that you've presented?
No, you make a presentation, 3-minute presentation, what your policies are.
Oh, sure. Okay, my name's Victoria Walker and I'm standing for the Legislative Assembly in March. And I have probably a 4-point plan. And I've actually identified the sort of things that I might like to do. The first issue is really cost of living. It is a major issue and it's growing by the day. And although the Reserve Bank is saying that there's not going to be any more rises, I don't think, looking internationally, that we really believe it. So what I propose to do is establish in Parliament a vigorous watching brief on the impact of the new government's policy. It's going to want to do a lot of things, and in its enthusiasm, I think both the members of Parliament and the public would be helpful to all of them to have some sort of mechanism, and I think the independents can do it rather than the parties, to look at the potential impact on cost of living of government expenditure. We're already in enormous debt and this government's increased that. So just servicing that is going to be an issue as interest rises. I was previously director of the Public Accounts Committee in New South Wales and similar committees in the Commonwealth and Victoria. And I think I know how to go about it in a fairly prompt way that will engage with the other members rather than being seen as disruptive. So the second area is state planning and development. Currently, the Environment Planning and Assessment Act of '79 has been varied in ways that favours developers and high-rise development. And we've seen that the Herald, I think a week ago, was very helpful for me because I see it very much in North Sydney, but I realise it's happening all over Sydney in the metropolitan area. I intend to table a bill in Parliament to replace the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act of 1979. It was a star act. It was a brilliant act when it came out and people came from overseas to work within it, but it's now moribund and its reputation is trash, particularly in local government circles and in places like North Sydney where the development is almost out of control, I think. My third area is climate change. And again, I intend to table a bill committing New South Wales to action. The Commonwealth passed a bill last May. Zali Steggall had been involved in that for some time, but New South Wales simply hasn't signed up to it. We've had the Treasurer announce a very ambitious target, which the government's own figures say they could never meet in greenhouse gas emission reduction.
Victoria, you have 10 seconds left.
Oh, good Lord. Okay, the fourth one's integrity of government. And to me, that's the most important because I'm very committed to democracy and genuine representation. And this government has, in a whole number of ways, squashed that so that members really have very little to say. They sat for 43 days out of 365 last year. Okay, thanks.
Sorry to cut you off, Victoria, but
that's right. No, I realise I'm being late. That's a big nuisance for you. Thanks.
Now I'll pass it over to Godfrey Santa from the Labor Party for his presentation. Godfrey. You're on mute, Godfrey.
Okay, is that okay?
That's fine now.
Good evening, and thank you, Christina and Colin, for inviting me to be here tonight. I'd also like to acknowledge the Camaragal people of the Eora Nation, on whose land I'm currently sitting, and pay respects to their elders past and present. I acknowledge the contribution they have given over thousands of years to the creation and preservation of our unique and wonderful Australian environment. A few words about me. I've lived here for 30 years in government service and as a local business owner. In this domain, I've brought my experience in local government to bear. I've introduced or supported a number of resolutions in council, most of which have been unanimously adopted in such areas as food, organic waste, the FOGO garbage collection system, a neighbourhood power sharing scheme designed to overcome the lower take-up of solar power by multi-residential buildings and to combine with the federal Labor government's community battery scheme, the protection and enhancement of our harbourside walks and parks, including Aboriginal sites, and our opposition to the Warringah Freeway Upgrade Beaches Link project. I will take policy recommendations on all these issues, plus an enhanced role for local government in implementing them to state parliament if I'm elected in 16 days' time. Today is almost 12 years into a Liberal and National Party government. Over those 12 years, it's been a bumpy ride. Severe drought, terrifying and destructive bushfires, a global pandemic, statewide flooding, they've all put immense pressure on our people and on our environment. In 12 years, there have been 6 environment ministers, the systematic weakening of environmental protection laws, koala wars, perverse pieces of legislation, and the government's decision to give bushfire relief grants to Liberal-held electorates and deny them to Labor-held ones. There have been cuts to the public service and local government where decades of experience have been lost. The latest State of the Environment report tells us the story. Almost every key environmental indicator is going in the wrong direction. The picture is challenging to say the least, but we can turn this around. We know that action on climate change and protection of the environment is a top of mind issue for most of the citizens of the state. Labor and government makes care and protection of our environment, like our education and our health systems, its core business for New South Wales. Today, 16 days out from the state election, I want to give an outline of the approach the next Labor government will take. We've made some significant announcements of our election policies on the environment, and there'll be more to be made in coming days. If elected in March, Labor will take real action on climate change. We will legislate emissions reduction targets of 50% by 2030 and net zero by 2050. We will back that with the creation of
10 seconds, Godfrey.
Of a net zero commission. We will create a New South Wales Energy Security Corporation to accelerate investment in renewals and secure a permanent dispatchable supply of clean power. We will work with a number of policies, which I can outline to you, and deliver the environmental change that we need.
To be fair to the other candidates, I'm sorry, I have to cut you off. Thank you, Godfrey. And now we'll move on to the set questions. I think I probably should read out the questions first. Does everyone agree with that? So the first question, and as I mentioned before, the order of answering is changed from the order of speakers. So the first question will be answered by Helen Conway first. Question 1, New South Wales now has an emission reduction target of 70% by 2035. The source of emissions in New South Wales. But emissions from burning fossil fuels such as coal and gas that are mined in New South Wales remain unchecked, with coal mined in New South Wales causing more emissions than the UK or France and nearly 4 times more than directly emitted from New South Wales itself. If elected, how would you help control coal and gas mining to within safe limits for our climate and the climate of New South Wales children alive today?
Thanks, Colin. Look, this current government simply can't be trusted on emissions reduction. There can be no new coal and gas projects if we want a safe climate for current and future generations. New fossil fuel developments are absolutely incompatible with emissions reductions targets, and they certainly fail to address climate change and fly in the face of Australia's international obligations. Now, we've had 26 new coal and gas projects approved since the Paris Agreement, and if you total up the emissions of those projects, it's 4.4 billion tonnes of CO2 over the lifetime of those projects, and that's 32 times what New South Wales currently emits a year. So we need to legislate, and this is what I'll push for. We'll need to legislate faster emissions reduction targets and develop a clear roadmap for emissions reductions in the very hard to abate sectors. I'm looking for 60% emissions reduction by 2030, 80% by 2035, and net zero by 2040. And we need to build in ongoing monitoring and transparent reporting of progress. We must transition our economy away from fossil fuels. It's both an economic opportunity and an economic imperative. It's time we stop propping up polluting industries and invest in genuine transformation. I'm committed to working towards a strong decarbonised economy and a safe climate for all. It's time to embrace the reindustrialisation of our economy and lay the foundation for new jobs and investment opportunities that the zero emissions climate will provide for us in this state.
Thank you, Helen. Now I'll ask Felicity to give her answer.
Thank you very much, Colin. Thank you for acknowledging that New South Wales has a 70% emissions reduction target by 2035. And let me note that that is the New South Wales Liberals and Nationals target. It is the most significant target that we have across the entire country, and it outstrips the federal Labor government by almost 30%. And it's also outstrips New South Wales Labor. So the decision you have if you want action on emissions reduction in this election is whether or not you support the Liberal National government that not only has the most ambitious emissions reduction targets, but also has the plans in place in order to meet them. Because we can't just be about rhetoric. We can't just throw around concepts about trying to transition. We actually need to put the plans in place to transition, which is why we've had for multiple years our energy transmission and infrastructure roadmap in place in New South Wales, which we legislated. We've got almost $40 billion of private sector investment that we've brought on board to create a renewable superpower here in New South Wales. This is why WWF has independently come out and said that New South Wales leads the entire country in renewables, because not only do we have the goals, we have the plans to deliver on it. And when you look at things like coal mining and gas, we've embedded in the Independent Planning Commission process, who independently assesses these applications, we've embedded in their decision-making our 70% by 2035 reduction target. They are required to incorporate that in any assessment they undertake. But we also need to know that this is a transition. We can't turn off the lights overnight. What we need to do is have reliable, affordable and clean energy, and you'll only get that with a Liberal National government.
Thank you, Felicity. Now we'll ask Victoria to answer the question.
Thank you. I'd like to pick up where the last speaker left off. Treasurer Matt Keane announced this ambitious new target of a 70% reductions just 2 days before Christmas, where we had lots and lots of announcements from the current government. This is a reduction target for 2035. And his reasons for the target are very interesting. He said, New South Wales can attract international capital and talent if we seize the opportunity to be at the forefront of a low carbon global economy. And he added, we've got policies that are legislated and in place to meet those targets. Well, I actually haven't seen much evidence of the legislation to meet the targets, particularly this new 70% one, and the government's own net zero emissions dashboard, which they had in place, suggested that New South Wales would fail to meet even the previous target of a 50% reduction, putting their new goal for 2035 well out of reach. I've made a commitment to table a climate change bill in Parliament that sets reduction targets for greenhouse gas emissions to achieve net zero by 2050. It'll require Treasury to develop an annual climate change budget paper, ministers to table an annual climate change statement.
10 seconds, Victoria.
Detailing action in their portfolios. But I just want to say we're heading for a period of change in lifestyle expectations, the scale of which we don't anticipate. As a consequence of global warming, we might find we've invested
Sorry, Victoria, but I'll have to cut you off now.
Okay, good fellow. Thank you.
Okay, now I'll ask Godfrey to answer the question. Question one.
Thank you. Look, we've heard these targets that others have, but we're actually going to introduce an organisation which is going to bring them about. We've announced that in New South Wales, the Labor government will create the New South Wales Energy Security Corporation, a publicly owned company to accelerate investment in renewables and secure a permanent dispatchable supply of clean power. Labor's Energy Corporation will partner with industry on projects that provide affordable, accessible and reliable clean energy. This is in opposition to the coalition government's disastrous privatisation policy. This will include medium to long-term duration renewable storage solutions such as pumped hydro, community batteries to maximise the benefit to households of rooftop solar and any other commercially viable technologies which provide grid stability and will expand private sector investment in renewable energy in New South Wales. This policy announcement has been backed by the Clean Energy Council, saying it appears to have struck the right balance to ensure the state remains a beneficiary for private investors. It will help lower prices, create jobs, keep the lights on, and reduce our emissions.
Thank you, Godfrey. Now we'll ask James.
So the Greens are proposing that we phase out coal and gas by 2030. The truth of the matter is we really don't have time to waste on this dilly-dallying with targets and nice announcements. We need to phase out coal and gas by 2030, as well as reach net zero by 2035. Really, we're already seeing the effects of climate change throughout the bushfires, the floods. We don't have time to waste until 2050. You're not going to get this action from the major parties while they're still accepting donations from fossil fuel companies. Unfortunately, that's just going to make them beholden to these fossil fuel companies, and in transition plans, these fossil fuel companies will end up profiting as opposed to the communities that actually need the money to transition out of these industries. The Greens also have a plan to make fossil fuel companies pay for the transition. So these companies have caused huge environmental damage. So they need to clean up the mess that they've created. And we need them to also fund disaster recovery, because these natural disasters are only going to get worse and only become more frequent. We also, as I was mentioning earlier, have a plan to transition fossil fuel workers, so we're not leaving them out in the dark to either go across to renewable energy sector or into different sectors altogether. We need to take care of the people who have been working in this industry as well. The Greens are taking action now, and we have been for the last 10 to 15 years. We're the party that championed climate action, and now everyone else is trying to catch up. So you can trust the Greens because we've got a great track record in acting and advocating for climate action.
Sorry, I'm going to
long before it was popular.
I'm going to have to cut you off, James.
That's all good.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And now we'll move on to the second question. Question number 2. If you're elected to Parliament on the 25th of March, would you support the building of sustainable transport to the northern beaches, such as light rail instead of another toll road, such as the Beaches Link, at a huge cost to the environment? So, Victoria gets, Felicity Wilson will answer the second question first.
Well, we've actually already built sustainable transport from the northern beaches through our community. It's one of the first things that we were completing when I was elected as a new member of Parliament, the B-Line, which was a transformative rapid bus transit system, which we'd never actually had in the country before. It's something we took from overseas, looking at best practice and introducing it here. And anyone who uses the buses, I mean, I live at Cremorne, I love our buses, and so do my kids particularly. It's really transformed the way people get around, the turn up and go service. And that's just one of the things that we do for public transport. You'd know that we have had the largest investment in public transport of any government in any jurisdiction in Australia's history. When you look around the state, you look at the metro networks, you look at the fact that we're electrifying our bus fleet, you look at the lower emission ferries that we've invested in, and you even look at the fact our EV strategies, the fact that we're trying to catalyse the transformation of our road fleet in private transport into electric vehicles, not just for EV subsidies, but also for charging points, for instance. But when it comes to things like roads and this criticism and attack of roads, I don't know how people can do that when we all use these roads for vehicles. What we're doing with the Beaches Link Tunnel has been something that's been independently assessed as a high priority for our community and for the state by Infrastructure New South Wales. What we do as Liberals is we look at what the best evidence and advice is around where we need to spend money. Beaches Link is crucial to our community. The rat running, the impacts on locals needs to be addressed. We'll deliver Beaches Link. We'll have a bus lane in Beaches Link, but we'll also deliver world-class public transport at the same time.
Thank you. Now I'll ask Victoria to respond to them.
Thanks. I'll start with the paragraph I didn't finish last time, which is simply that we're heading into a period of change in lifestyle expectations as a consequence of global warming. We might find, I think we will find, we have invested in stranded assets of little relevance to the lifestyle of tomorrow. The Beaches Link Tunnel and Toll Road, as presently outlined by New South Wales Transport, will have 2 portals, one in Balgala, one in Seaforth, taking vehicles through 7 kilometres of tunnels under Middle Harbour and the lower North Shore. I've lost it now, it's good. The plan fails to address issues such as the ecological damage to Burnt Bridge Creek and Manly Dam, risks associated with disturbing contaminated sediment in Middle Harbour, or to identify the location of unfiltered smokestacks and their potential health risks for residents along the route. The cost is currently estimated to be from $10 to $12 billion. The great selling point on the northern beaches for the project is increased speed. It's estimated that the Beaches Link will save an hour's travel time from DY to the airport. A metro extension would be largely underground, light rail above ground. And above ground in Sydney, it's proved to be very slow, far slower than cars or buses, certainly far slower than the B line mentioned by the last speaker. So there's all sorts of problems with all these different
10
choices.
seconds.
Thank you. I'm done.
Okay, now, Godfrey, would you like to respond?
Thank you. I'd start out by saying that the Labor Party has announced we will scrap the Beaches Link project. We just cannot understand why this has been allowed to go ahead. And with a whole review of this Warringah Freeway upgrade Beaches Link, the terms that were set were, do not explore a public transport option. They've just been fixated on roads, on tollways, and getting people around by that method rather than by public transport. The Labor Party has announced Beaches Link will not go ahead. Instead, we will be introducing public transport option and looking into the best means of achieving that. We definitely can't keep going with the way we are building these urban freeway projects, which increase pollution, which increase traffic clogging on, it's certainly in the North Sydney area. The traffic clogging is going to be incredible and on the roads here, particularly given the design that they've given for this with Berry Street as providing the interchange link to the project. We just can't go on this way. It has to stop, and we will be introducing a public transport option.
Thank you, Godfrey. Now we'll ask for James to give his answer. You there, James? Yes.
Computer
You're on mute.
on mute there.
Yeah.
There we go. Oh, later. Okay, there we go. All right, I'll start the time now. So yeah, we vehemently oppose the Beaches Link tunnel. The fact of the matter is building more roads does not actually mediate traffic. It actually induces demand, giving people the only option to drive. So we vehemently oppose this project, as well as the Warringah Freeway upgrades. We need to be building public transport options. We don't want to be stuck in a city where the personal private car is the dominant mode of transport. It's bad for the environment. It's bad for our communities to stand outside on Military Road for more than 5 minutes and you feel sick, guarantee you that much. That's why we're also advocating for electric buses instead, because they're not as noisy or polluting. It's not just that, it's the environmental destruction that comes along with these tunnel projects. If you've been up and down the Warringah Freeway recently, it looks more like a third world country desert than it does the beautiful North Shore of Sydney. It's disgusting, and this is the price we pay to encourage more people to drive instead of offering simple transport solutions like increased ferry services. Why can I not catch a ferry from Balmoral Beach to Manly, Mossman to Manly, Neutral Bay to Manly, or even jump on the new Manly ferries that always seem to be breaking down? We need to look at every other option before we go with the roads solution. Cycling infrastructure in Mossman and North Sydney is absolutely pathetic.
And second,
black hole, and the state government needs to step in to support local councils to build more active transport. We can have a great future where we're not choked up by cars and roads everywhere, and we can get around the city with ease and leaving the car at home.
Thank you, James. Now pass it over to Helen to give her answer.
Thanks, Colin. Look, I'll just pick up on one point that Felicity made about the buses. I have to say this government does public transport really badly. Its own inquiry at the end of last year determined that the privatisation of the bus services have been a complete disaster. So we need public transport, but this government doesn't know how to do it. But moving more specifically to the question, the Legislative Council Public Works Committee reported into the Warringah Freeway upgrade and the Beaches project link last year, towards the end of last year, and there were 575 submissions to that inquiry, with the vast majority, I might say, opposed to the projects. And the committee identified various issues with the planning and the justification of the projects, and a key problem was that the government failed to consider public transport options. So I'm calling on the government to release the business case and the cost-benefit analysis on the Beaches link, which of course it has never, ever released. That was recommended by that committee. The government's got to plainly demonstrate the benefits of these projects on long-term traffic mitigation. The role of the public transport in our transport networks must also be considered to improve mobility, relieve congestion, and help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This state government should be prioritising investment in public transport. And in the first instance, I would support an
10
assessment
seconds, Helen.
public transport improvement options for the Northern Beaches.
Thank you, Helen. Now we'll move on to question number 3. And I'll read that one out. Just cancel this time. Question number 3. With the widening of the Warringah Freeway and initial work for the Western Harbour Tunnel and Beaches Link tunnels underway, almost 1,000 mature trees have been cleared from the area, and public parkland and green space has been removed permanently. What would you do if elected to Parliament to return the net loss of green space in the electorate? And where will the 2-to-1 tree replacements be planted? What would your plan to maintain mature tree canopy on public land and parklands now in the future North Shore electorate? So once again, we'll change the order of response. So I'll ask now Victoria to respond to that question, please.
The question, I don't actually agree that the 2-for-1 was for the whole of the North Sydney area, right? Or it was for the residents of Camaray. It was to do entirely with the loss of 40% of their golf course. And we had a photo in the press of the local member putting in 1 sapling. There's quite a few more to go, but there's been no commitment to replant the trees being chopped down all over North Sydney by New South Wales Transport. Merlin Park was asphalted over as a parking area for heavy machines, and a swathe of mature trees on Whaling Road Park chopped down and ground into wood chips before our eyes. This public sector vandalism is not limited to North Shore. In 2022, the National Party opposed the protection of tree species vital for koalas, and the government approved 16,000 new homes to be built on the last koala habitat on the Cumberland Plain. Given the increased volatility and extremes of climate change we're already experiencing, we need to value our tree cover, plant more trees and nurture them to maturity. Councils work at it, but there needs to be a commitment to mature tree cover built into our targets to mitigate climate change, and they will be included in the climate change bill that I intend to table in the New South Wales Parliament.
Thank you, Victoria. Now I'll ask Godfrey for his response.
Thank you. I mean, what a sad situation that is. Those lovely trees lost. One of them being a tree that we call the umbrella tree, where my grandsons used to play after I picked them up from Anzac Park School. That tree was well away from the freeway project, but it's been removed anyway. One of the contractor obviously had a good time with his machine. We've lost trees. We've lost other flora and fauna for this project, and it's sad that it's happened. We will make sure that the 2-for-1 is maintained, and we won't just plant with saplings the way they're planting now. We'll plant with mature trees to try and compensate for the loss in some way. But the sad thing is that throughout the North Sydney area, the tree canopy has declined, and we have to arrest that decline. We have to increase the amount of trees which are planted, and we will engage in a program to ensure that that happens.
Thank you, James. Godfrey. Now that's James, please, to answer.
This issue is a great case for why we need a Greens member in the North Shore. Just over on the other side of the West Harbour Tunnel, they have Jamie Parker, a Greens member. He's been there for about 12 years now. In compensation for the West Connects and Western Harbour Tunnel destruction, that community got 10 hectares worth of new green space, which is lovely for their community, great for the environment. Meanwhile, on this side, the destruction in Camaray Park, we've been compensated with only 1.9 hectares of green space in Berries Bay. That's quite appalling, and I think that's due to our underwhelming local representation. The big thing there is they actually advocated to get all the warehouses that they're putting onto the site put underground. Why didn't we get that here? As for where we can plant new tree canopies, 2 great spots I think we should be looking into is the Chatswood dive site for the Metro, right across from the Great Northern Hotel, and also the Victoria Cross dive site, which is just across from North Sydney Council Chambers. Transport for New South Wales currently owns this land, and as compensation for the green space and tree canopy they've destroyed, they should give those sites back to us. We also need to strengthen the EPA's power to prevent tree loss, not just to issue warnings and fines. They actually need to make it illegal to be able to do these things, as well as returning powers to local councils to not only promote more tree, to promote their own tree canopy. Local councils know the area best, but also to prevent further loss from state government projects coming in over the top and destroying the natural environment councils are responsible for.
Good, thank you, James. Now, move on to Helen, please.
Well, I think it's clear that the current government's plan for tree replacement is totally inadequate. I mean, it's incorrect for the government to claim that planting 2 small saplings is sufficient offset for the loss of a mature tree. It'll take more than 30 years for those trees to mature, if indeed they all survive, and we know, of course, they don't. We must prioritise the retention of mature trees in our urban environment because trees aren't a luxury. Tree canopy is essential for a livable city. Now, the erosion of local councils' power in the planning process means that they have less ability to protect the environment, and this includes the tree canopy, of course. I strongly support the overhaul of the planning system, so it better serves the community, and it serves the interests of the community in the sense that the local council will have more say in an overhauled planning system. I mean, the continued reliance by the coalition government on a hastily thrown together state environmental plan policy or two that override all LEPs simply undermines the ability for strategic planning at a local level. It also undermines trust in the system. An over-reliance on state significant development pathways is also a concern because it removes local decision-making and risks disrupting the existing strategic intent of local
10 seconds.
which had been endorsed by local communities.
Thank you, Helen. Now, over to Felicity for her answer.
Thank you very much. Now, let's be really clear about this piece of infrastructure. This is a piece of infrastructure that has been identified as one of the most necessary pieces of infrastructure for our state. The 2 harbour crossings are already over capacity and we need to have a third. That's infrastructure we're delivering. I won't resolve from the fact that we have delivered more infrastructure than anybody else in New South Wales, and we've got $116 billion of investment over the forward estimates yet to come. What we need to do is minimise the impacts of that. And the 2-for-1 tree replacement was actually, and it was incorporated in the planning by us, by our government. It was a decision we made to at least double the tree canopy. We put it in the planning requirements, and we also made a commitment as a government to increase the overall tree canopy for North Sydney. And I don't know where the misrepresentations about saplings are coming from. There was an incredibly comprehensive tree strategy, which anybody in the community could have put their feedback into and could have read the document, which talks in great detail about the fact that we will have a range of different types of trees and maturities that can be transplanted. There are already 2 nurseries growing trees for our community out in Sydney. So these are trees that are going to be lovingly grown and cared for to the point where they can be transplanted into our community. And these are the lungs of our community. I breathe this air here. My children breathe this air here. I live on just near Military Road. I understand all the impacts of these projects. And I've worked really hard to get extra public space. Berries Bay, the High Line, Wodongaree Park, Northcliffe Park, record investments in Middlehead National Park. I'm going to keep doing that as your local member.
Thank you, Felicity. Thank you very much. Now, move on to question number 4. I'll read it out for you. If you're elected to Parliament on the 25th of March, would you support the extension of the existing Leppington line to the new airport, to provide a direct heavy rail connection between the 2 airports, instead of the expansion of the privatised metro network to Leppington, by cannibalising the existing government-operated Leppington line, causing passengers to change trains at Glenfield? Now, to answer this one first, we'll ask Godfrey, please.
Thank you. Labor will not be privatising the metro, so I question some of the elements of the question. We won't be privatising the metro or anything else, such as Sydney Water. We will make sure that the lines that run to the airport, there's a proper business case presented for them, so that they don't end up being a tremendous liability on the taxpayer. Whichever system we bring in, for transport to the airport, we will ensure that it has a sound business case. We are committed to the preparation of a final line for a final case for the metro line system. Macarthur to Bradfield, to Glenfield, and we will make sure that 2 of the 4 Metro line proposals, which are currently being put forward by the current government, will go ahead as long as the business plan can be justified. We will ensure that the airport is properly served by public transport.
Thank you, Godfrey. Now I'll ask James to give his answer.
I'd just like to echo Godfrey's sentiment and say, yes, we cannot be privatising public transport, especially new public transport. This shouldn't be seen as a cash cow for private companies to milk the people of New South Wales for any extra cash. We already said it with our tolls being a private system. We're the most heavily tolled jurisdiction almost in the world. For this project, though, specifically, contracts have already been awarded and planning approval has been given by New South Wales and federal government. So this might actually be a difficult one to go back on now that the wheels are in motion. However, I think we should be opposing this because it doesn't actually connect up to the existing airport. And much as we saw with the replacement of the Bankstown line with Metro, it seems like unnecessary infrastructure spending where there's already infrastructure that can serve the area and integrate into the system a lot better. So we'd prefer an integrated system that connects the 2 airports through existing infrastructure as opposed to another overspend on Metro. And that's why you've seen record spending by the Liberal government, because they've really mismanaged a lot of these projects. The Metro project's already $6 billion overrun. The light rail project was $3 billion over budget. So things like this, we actually really need to tighten our belt on these infrastructure projects. Yes, we need public transport, but we need them to be managed better and out of private hands where the government can actually control the project so they don't become too expensive and don't end up just benefiting private companies and not the public.
Thank you, James. Now I'll pass it over to Helen.
Thanks, Colin. Look, I'm not an expert in rail transport, and I haven't been briefed by experts on the proposed public transport projects for Western Sydney. However, I am very concerned about the enormous costs associated with the construction of 4 new metro rail lines, which have been estimated at about $60 billion. And this is because there are suggestions that the business case just doesn't stack up. Now, Infrastructure Australia in 2021 warned that the cost of building the Western Sydney Airport Metro Rail well and truly outweighed the benefits to the tune of $1.8 billion. It's a lot of money. And they found that the project's business case was based on quite a few flawed assumptions. And the current government likes to talk about recycling, which is really just privatisation, frankly. But let's talk honestly about what it means. We're building infrastructure, but under what guiding framework? As a community, we're left with assets which are built without reference to our needs. These infrastructure projects are also plagued by billions of dollars of cost blowouts and delays. So infrastructure for infrastructure's sake is not good policy, and I'd like to see this government commit to building sustainable, healthy cities we need for the future. And if I'm elected, I will be holding the next government to account to deliver the infrastructure for our community, which it both wants and needs. Now, infrastructure that is fit for purpose, based on best global practice, is what we want.
10 seconds.
We don't want infrastructure that serves the purposes of developers and toll operators rather than our communities.
Thank you, Helen. And now I'll ask Felicity to give their answer.
Thank you. Well, I've got to say, I love the Metro. Anyone who's ever been on the Metro loves the Metro. And I can't wait for it to come to North Sydney and Crow's Nest just next year. When you think about the fact that from Crow's Nest to Chatswood, 3 minutes on a metro train. I mean, it's groundbreaking. Crow's Nest into Barangaroo, 4 minutes. These are types of transformations that we're putting in place. And we're already converting the Sydenham to Bankstown line to Metro to uncouple it from the heavy rail network because of the backlog and bottleneck at Bankstown where all the lines intersect, which can put commuters in Hornsby or Waverton or Bankstown or the city back, have a considerable impact on their commutes. The metro system that we're putting forward with the 4 new lines out in Western Sydney will create essentially an entire orbital ring of connected metros around our city and an east-west corridor connecting it as well, with the connections being the CBD and the Eastern Harbour City, Parramatta in the centre and Westmead in the centre, and then out to Western Sydney at the Nancy Bird Walton International Airport. I think it's actually astounding that we're creating and transforming this amazing new public transport infrastructure for Sydney. So the question about whether or not we should be doing it, I actually think every single part of Sydney in our state should have just the same level of quality public transport infrastructure investment. And when you look at people who live out in Western Sydney, when you look at the jobs being catalysed at the new
10
international
seconds,
airport,
thanks, Felicity.
we need to make sure that they can get to and from work and home reliably at a cheap cost, sustainably, and make sure they have the ability to work close to home and enjoy all the things that we can living close to the Eastern Harbour City.
Thank you, Felicity. And now we'll pass it up to Victoria, please, for the
Thank
final
you.
answer to
I mentioned the
question.
risk of stranded assets earlier, and I think I'll just refer to it quickly again. The commodity that's most essential for the new airport is an uninterrupted supply of aviation fuel. Currently, it's piped from Port Botany to Mascot Airport. The safest way to transport it to the new airport is by direct pipeline. The JUHI, the Joint User Hydrant Installation, that's used by airports around the world. If it's not going to be done, if there's no pipeline in place, we're left with a situation where to fuel an Airbus 380 requires 250 metric tonnes of fuel, 320,000 litres. Carried by road would require 7 supersized tanker loads of fuel for each Airbus. So the answer to me for Badgerys Creek is if there's no JUHI proposed, I would certainly support electrified heavy rail connection between the two airports. It could collect fuel and goods from Port Botany, goods from the Road Transport Distribution Centre at St Peters, and it could be integrated into the Sydney Transport Network at key stations to serve both passengers and goods. A metro line is really designed for passengers. It could link the new airport into transport hubs, but
10
it
seconds.
couldn't manage to carry fuel or heavy freight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria, for your answer. Now, we move on to questions from the floor. So I'll pass it over to Nick to see what questions there might have come through.
Thank you very much, Colin. There's some excellent questions, and I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I didn't bring one from the membership of Australian Parents for Climate Action. In particular, as the cost of living is a primary concern for so many households, and with essentials like energy costs set to rise even further. If elected, how would you support more households to access the long-term cost solutions of clean, efficient energy use at home, especially those households that are least able to afford upgrades or residents who rent their home?
Okay, well, I think maybe I'll ask Godfrey to respond to this one first. Have 1 minute, Godfrey.
Thank you. An excellent question, and one that I'm very keen to answer. We're already taking steps to ensure that families, renters, as well as owners have access to cheaper, cleaner power, establishing a community battery system, a neighbourhood power sharing schemes, because one of the big problems with conversion to clean energy is the fact that the efficiency of solar power is reduced if you're in a multi-residential building. We want to overcome that problem and establish through a neighbourhood power sharing scheme combined with the community batteries, which the federal government has announced, to introduce cheaper renewable energy to every household, including multi-residential buildings. We want to make sure that the great benefits that can come from
10 seconds, Godfrey,
are shared by everyone concerned.
Thank you, Godfrey. And I'd like Felicity to respond as well. Good. Felicity, are you there?
Thank you.
Like
Sorry, I was just unmuting. I had to change computers because my battery was dying. So I'm working out the new one. Thanks very much for the question, Nick. And I think we all know that we need to work much more closely on these issues together and have tailored solutions to the different sectors that want to create change. And I think we're at a point in our community where people want to take real action. As I said earlier, I'm a renter. So if I want to make changes, if I want to put in smart meters, if I want to get an EV, if I want to look at making any modifications to the property, there are restrictions and limitations to the way that I can do that. So working on strata reforms, working on specific incentive schemes, seeing that landlords and owners understand the longer term benefit. And some of that can be helped by some of the reforms we're putting through, for instance, to encourage long-term leases of 3 to 5 years so that people can feel more like that's their home and a longer term investment. But equally with things like EV, as I said earlier, we're investing in charging stations, we're subsidising people to make sure that they can get EVs.
I'd be very happy to work with you on other initiatives, because it's definitely something myself and my generation are really focused on making a difference.
Thank you, Felicity. And I'll ask James also to respond.
So one of the big issues here is the public's actually lost control of our power system and our power grid through the privatisation of power in New South Wales, especially through the transmission networks that happened under the Baird administration. Oh, sorry, it was a 99-year lease, not a sell-off. Has made power prices grow further and further. So that's why the Greens are proposing this election to establish Power New South Wales, a new publicly owned non-profit electricity company that will buy back our power assets and set power prices. Because if we leave it up to private companies to set the power bills and set the rates of power, they're only going to go up and up and up and keep extorting the public for an essential service. We also at the same time need to be investing in publicly owned renewable energy. So not just leaving that up to the private sector, we need publicly owned assets. And as well as giving renters more rights to actually make modifications to the home as a renter and as someone who's part of a younger generation too.
And would Helen and Victoria like to also respond to that question?
Yes, I'll take a different perspective from these high-level things, which I think are very important. But years ago, I set up a program called Community Energy Program in the Community Development Bureau. And many of those, the people that were helped by that program were living in the Blue Mountains. They were renting in houses that had been built a century before as summer houses in the mountains to get away from the heat in Sydney. They had no insulation. They had leaks all over the walls. And these people were living there in winter. And this was a small and very effective program of assisting with insulation, with simple repairs and carpentry to seal up leaks and to put insulation in the roofs, so that life became more comfortable, and the cost of energy, which was a lot cheaper then, wasn't prohibitive. Okay, that's it. So you can do it in a small way as well as a big, I think I'm saying.
Thank you. And Helen, would you like to respond as well or not?
Yeah, thanks, Colin. Look, I think cost of living is a big issue for everybody at the moment, and energy costs are a significant component of that. We really need very pinpointed incentives for both those who own their homes and for those who are renting to ensure that the cost of energy can be subsidised to make those costs reasonable for people. At base, we need to electrify as quickly as possible households and businesses, and we need the government to support that. So a competent financial government would be able to do that. So perhaps some of the money that we're losing through cost blowouts on big infrastructure projects and the like could be repurposed, and if it was saved, and put into a pinpointed, properly framed incentive scheme for owners and renters to electrify their homes.
10 seconds. Good. Thank you, Helen. Now, Nick, further questions?
I might pass the mic over to Mel so I can share the space.
Okay,
Yeah.
Mel.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks, Colin. So here's a question from Peter Harvard that was put in the chat earlier. Do you believe climate change school education in New South Wales schools should be made compulsory in line with the UN calls for a compulsory climate change education in all schools by 2025? Climate change education content of the last version, V9 of the Australian curriculum, is all non-compulsory. It's also worth adding that climate change school education in Italy and Israel is now compulsory, and in the UK, it's being considered.
Okay, Felicity, I'll pass this one to you to answer first.
Thanks, Colin. Well, my view is just like in industry and in government and policies, I think we need to integrate the climate issues across everything we do and everything we think about. I mean, it changes planning, it changes infrastructure, it changes the way in which we make all types of decisions, and is having a phenomenal impact on the economy, on investment, for instance. So I think it's an incredibly valid point to raise and something we should be considering. I would actually expect that when you look across the curriculum, you're already probably seeing in most courses conversations around the impacts of climate change. It doesn't just need to be, siphoned off into geography or science or social sciences. And I think you're going to see from our young people, what I see from our young people in our schools all the time is a very strong view about climate action and protecting our environment. So those conversations will be coming up constantly.
10 seconds.
I'm open to it. I think it's a really good idea, but I also think we probably already have that burning platform within our education system to make sure that we're all focused on these issues.
Thank you, Felicity. And I'll ask James to respond now.
In short, yes, it should be compulsory. Much as health education is compulsory, back in the day, I'm sure there wasn't as much information about nutrition, about sugar, fats, what's good for you, healthy diet and exercise. But as soon as the science became set and solid, that became part of the school curriculum. I think that's got to be the same with climate change education, because Felicity's right, it is a health issue, it's an economic issue, and it will affect every part of our lives going forward, especially for the younger generation. But it is really encouraging to see the climate strikes of late. We see kids who have responded to this information, but not kids, sorry, young adults who have responded to this information and taken up the cause of climate action, because what they're seeing and what they're hearing from their current politicians is not good enough. And I think the more we educate the younger people, like myself, the more they'll become aware and more equipped to take on the future, as well as affect political change as well. Because my generation's coming through now, and we really need to take control of the future, which will be ours.
Thank you, James. And now I'll ask Godfrey to respond.
Thank you. Australia is starting to realise that climate change is fact. And while I believe that everyone should be entitled to their own opinion, you can't have everyone entitled to their own facts. And so the fact of climate change should be incorporated in our schools. It should be taught as a fact, as an existence. So that not alongside that, we also need to ensure that children and students at schools realise that it is a fact, it is a problem, it's a problem capable of solution, and we can adopt a scientific approach to attacking the problem and solving it. And I think that it should be part of the curriculum of the school. It should be a part of the compulsory curriculum of the school, and perhaps not just on its own. It should be wedded into the other subjects that are taught in the schools as well. So I'd be very much in favour of that.
Thank you, Godfrey. And Victoria or...
Yes. Do you want me to speak in the same?
Yes, Victoria, would you like to answer?
Yes, I don't like the word compulsory, and I hate the idea of burdening teachers with more, but my really feeling is try and stop them. It is such a burning issue discussed around dinner tables. My real concern is that it shouldn't frighten children. There are some quite frightening aspects to climate change, but I don't want them to believe they're growing up in a world that's, going to burn them up or fall apart. I would like it to be a constructive and positive use of science and human ingenuity, and to give them an optimistic view of it. So it's a bit hard for a curriculum planner, but put it on the table.
Thank you, Victoria. And Helen, would you like to respond?
Well, look, I think it's really encouraging because young people are very aware of climate change. These kids, very young kids, actually will talk to you about climate change. But I'd like to pick up on a point that Godfrey was making, and that is that there is, while a high awareness, I think there's a lot of misinformation as well. So I think any education in schools has got to be absolutely fact-based. And it's got to be suitably detailed. It just can't be at the high level. It's got to be a suitably substantive course to make it worthwhile. Of course, if you talk to teachers, they'll say, how do we fit it into the curriculum? There are so many things we want to teach our kids. So this, of course, is a very important topic, but how it's incorporated into the curriculum, I'd like to see done in consultation, obviously, with teachers and those who are putting the curriculums together.
Good. Thank you very much, Helen. Now I'll pass it back to Mel or Nick if they have another question.
Certainly, thanks. Next question from Anna, looking at transport. A new electric car has between 10 to 25 tonnes of embodied emissions. The IPCC, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, says we had 37 tonnes left each in 2021. How will you and your party support people to ride bikes, like they can in Paris, Barcelona, London, Amsterdam and elsewhere? Electric cargo bikes mean the school run and moving furniture can now be done on a bike, e.g. 30km/h safe neighbourhood speeds. Transport for New South Wales needs to approve this, plus real connected bike network. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think we should pass this one over to James to start with.
Yeah. All right, my bike got fixed today as well. My back brake went bung on a hill going down to Mossman, and it's fixed now. But anyway, I'm just going to cut straight to the chase of the infrastructure that we're supporting in the North Shore. Currently, the West Street cycleway that connects Camaray and North Sydney is lacking funding. North Sydney Council has a plan to get that through, which is a crucial link to the motorway all the way up to Lane Cove and Epping. We'd like to see state funding go towards that project to help get the West Street cycleway built as well. We have announced that we are calling for a review into the Ringer Expressway upgrades, which at times the Ringer Expressway is 11 to 15 lanes and no cycling infrastructure. It's actually the missing link. As I said, you can go all the way from Epping down to Narrenburn, and the bike paths, separated bike path stop, you end up being spat out in North Sydney. So we want to see cycleway infrastructure on the Ringer Expressway, as well as more state funding to actually have an overall plan for the network, because North Sydney and Mossman are only a small part of the network. We need to look at this holistically across Sydney.
Thanks, James.
Cool.
And Helen, would you like to give your answer to this question?
Thanks, Colin. Well, look, active transport is really important for healthy cities. And it goes to this issue that we were talking about earlier, and that is about how planning's done in this state. You know, the planning really seems to be serving developers and toll operators and not communities at the moment. There needs to be a proper strategic approach taken to planning, which takes into account all the needs of the community, including active transport and public transport needs of the community. And at the moment, that's just not happening. And if you look around the electorate of North Shore, we do not have a properly integrated active transport proposition. So what I'd be looking for if I'm elected is to try and get some better strategy and more broad planning around infrastructure to ensure that the needs of the community are, front and centre, and they are not just secondary to those of developers and toll operators.
Thank you, Helen. Now, Victoria, would you like to respond?
I don't think there's a great deal left to say, except yes, I think we need to think a bit more seriously about bikeways. I think there is a bit of a threshold of people who are unable to ride bikes. But I agree that with the comments from the Green candidate, James, that the Warringah Expressway needs more thought to safely get bikes down through North Sydney so they're not spilling out all over the streets. So I'm just thinking now in terms of this electorate itself and the major problem that we're facing there. But I'm much in favour of bikes. Yes.
Thank you, Victoria. Felicity, would you like to respond?
Thank you. Well, I've got to say, I love seeing all the parents out and about lately with the two kids in the metal frame on the back of the bike. And I think I previously kind of thought that would be beyond me. And I see other parents doing it. And I know, actually, I can do that because I walk a lot. I catch buses a lot because of where I live and work. But having people doing that can help change the way that we think. And I grew up outside of Sydney, so it's always been daunting to me, the notion, I'm from the country, it's always been daunting to me, the notion of trying to ride bikes around Sydney a lot. So good on James in particular. We, as a government, we have invested so much in active transport. You'd know about the Sydney Harbour Bridge Cycleway, the investment we're putting into that. You'd know about Lavender Bay Highline as an active transport link. And also we want to see integrated transport plans across Sydney. It's incredibly crucial for them to be linked in because we are downstream as a community. We're a community that's been built up with narrow roads over time. And we've given countless millions of dollars to Mossman Council and North Sydney Council to deliver those projects. Sometimes they go and cancel them and don't proceed with them, so the money goes back in the pot. But everything we can do, we'll continue to do to support that type of infrastructure.
Thank you, Felicity. Thank you. Godfrey.
Thank you. I've lived in Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, Canberra and Sydney, and I have to say that the lack of an integrated cycle planning network here compared with all of those cities is absolutely woeful. Now, I accept that there are topographical problems in Sydney that perhaps don't exist in the other cities, But the fact is there has not been an integrated approach to the planning of cycleways in Sydney. We need to have it. We need to have a proper integrated approach. I think I agree with James on the Warringah Freeway idea of ensuring it, but we can perhaps start at the local level with an integrated cycle network, not just bits and pieces here and there, but a totally integrated structure so that a cyclist can go from point A to point B using the network, and that needs to be done, and we certainly will be doing it.
Good, thank you, Godfrey. Well, time's getting on, so I think we have time for 2 more questions. So Nick or Mel, do you have another question?
Over to you, Mel.
Thank you. So this one's from Tom Sherlock. To each of you, if you were to vote for one of the other candidates, who would you vote for and why? I'll pass this one on to Helen, I think, to start with.
Well, I'd want to see the full suite of policies of each of the candidates before I made a decision, because if I'm to vote for somebody, I would want to know that that person fully represented the concerns of the community, as I've heard those concerns as I've been around talking to the community for the last couple of months.
Thank you, Helen. Victoria.
Well, I go back to the beauty of our democratic system, which is the secret ballot. And I think that that's a gift which doesn't exist in so many places of the world. And I rather respect it. I'm not about to tell people how to vote. And I think when you get in there, you have the privacy of the polling booth to number your piece of paper however you wish. And so that should be.
Thank you, Victoria. Godfrey.
Yes, I too believe in the secret ballot system, and I prefer not to announce my preference for any of the other candidates. I would also agree with Helen that when we come into government, we need to ensure that we listen to the community and we respect the community's wishes. I am concerned about the lack of local government autonomy at the moment. It seems to have been just suppressed in its approach to governing, and I would want to ensure that whoever I partner with in government, it would be with people who have similar views on the need to consult the community.
Good, thanks, Godfrey. And Felicity?
Well, I have voted for James before. He didn't get my top preference when the council elections. I threw him a preference. He was an independent running in council. I didn't really know him, but he impressed me. And I loved his energy and his vigor and a lot of his values he shares with me. I got to say, I'd vote for myself, full stop. And I will vote for myself in this election, as I have the last 2 elections. But I did give James one of my preferences in the council elections. I'd also like to say I'd love to see Godfrey stay on council. It seems like you've done some great initiatives on council, so it'd be good for you to stay there. I'm happy to stay in the state seat and you can stay on council. I think it's excellent we've got people that are putting themselves forward. At the end of the day, it's most important that we have people who care about our community. I care about our community. I came into Parliament to do that, to be a voice for our community and to represent their values in the Parliament every single day. And that's what I've done. And I'm sure that the people that have put themselves forward also believe that they will have the best interest in the community in heart and in their actions if they're successful. I obviously hope that I'm successful, but I do love that we have a democracy where amazing people put themselves forward for public office.
Thank you, Felicity. And James?
Oh, what a spicy question. Well done. Look, I just want to say this is a really tough decision because, look, I actually quite like all the candidates we're running with, not to just have a positivity fest. However, when push comes to shove, when I did run in the council elections, day after day, week after week, I was standing next to Godfrey on pre-polling on election day as well. So I'd probably vote for Godfrey just for personal reasons. I think he's done a pretty impressive job on North Sydney Council as deputy mayor. And also the Labor Party, for all their faults, aren't all that bad, but they ain't perfect. That's why we exist. But if I could have a chance to also say about the other candidates, I've also spent plenty of time standing next to Felicity in the last few weeks. Felicity's a lovely person, and I can see the response she gets from the community that people are really positive about her. And I don't know how she keeps the smile going day after day after day, but she's a very optimistic and lovely person. Victoria Walker, who I didn't know much about coming into this election, is full of remarkable ideas. I think it's great to have a candidate who's really thinking outside the box and has the experience in the public service to put ideas out there of substance. And the same goes for Helen Conway, who has a very impressive CV.
Okay.
I've talked to her a few times, and I think she's an outstanding candidate too. Okay. So we're very lucky in the North Shore to have such good candidates, and me.
Thank you very much, James. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time. We don't have time for that last question. So I'd like to thank all the candidates who participated for coming along tonight and providing the answers to the set questions and answers to the questions from the floor. Yeah, so every day, as we know, the election's coming up on the 25th, and it is optional preferential, but just remember, you should mark every box in your order of preference to make sure that your vote counts on the night. And thank everyone also for coming in and joining us tonight's forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin.
Thanks, Colin. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to the organisers.
Thank you
Thanks,
very much.
everyone. Take care.